Hello and welcome to the Pre-Chiro podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Ben Glass, and today we're making a professional chiropractor connection out in Mexico with Dr. Tim Schaub. Tim, can you reflect on the time in life that you decided to become a chiropractor? Where were you at? What was it that inspired you to take this path?
Oh, very clearly. Well, what inspired me to take the path was, first of all, uh, my mom was a chiropractor. My dad was a chiropractor. My mom practiced for about 55 years. I believe my dad practiced for 60. And my mom uh, graduated from Cornell University in 1934, I believe. She was one of 17 women that graduated, and she was in a pre-med program. And all of her medical doctor instructors said to her, "Hey, what are you doing? Especially a beautiful woman like you, throwing your life away." She said, "You just teach me and let me do with my life what I want to do. We'll get along just fine." So she had never been to a chiropractor, but she had a chiropractor that traveled through the small town of Groton, New York. And in the wintertime, when the ice got bad and the snow got bad, and the horse and buggy couldn't get through to take care of her father would have heart problems. So that's about all she knew about chiropractic. She knew that chiropractic was drugless, it was non-surgical, and it helped her father heal, and it helped her father maintain his health. And so she said, "Well, that's good enough for me." So therefore, she moved after she graduated from chiropractic college. Her father had passed away, and she moved to New York City, and she studied chiropractic at the Eastern Institute of Chiropractic, which I believe was a branch of the Palmer College, but Simon Sensen and I argue about that, so I'm not really sure. So from that point on, she uh, she was a Christian. My dad was not. He was, I don't know what he was, an atheist or whatever. I have no clue. But anyway, she insisted that he become a Christian because she wouldn't marry him unless he did. And so the first day of class, they the U.S. federal marshals, it was a setup, came in and arrested their teacher. Now, when we go to school, you know what? I don't know what they teach now, first year of college at Cairo College, but they started them out not with like a table setup or biology or anatomy and physiology. They started out with neurophysiology. Now that's a heck of a thing to start out with, isn't it? So the teacher that taught them was a neurophysiologist. He was a chiropractor, but he was a neurophysiologist. So the the U.S. federal marshals marched in and said, "You're being arrested for practicing chiropractic without a license." At which point, probably 75% of the women that were in the class stood up and walked out and never came back, and 50% of the men that were in the class stood up and walked out and never came back. My mother, who knew absolutely nothing about chiropractic, leaned over and said to my father, she and him had first met, she says, "Bill, if they're that afraid of us, we better stick around because we must really be on to something." And so that was the beginning of my chiropractic life, because for the next few years, the guys teased my mother in school. And they said, "No, Bill's married, isn't he?" He had told her that he was married. He was a terrible prankster. So he told her that he was married. So because she was a Christian, she didn't want to have anything to do with him, but he kept asking her out. And they kept saying, the guys in the class kept saying to her, "Well, hey, what is it? Does Bill have 5 kids or is it 6? He lives out on the island, but how many kids does he actually have? I can't remember." So my mother didn't have anything to do with him until she finally figured out he wasn't married. And then she said, "You have to become a Christian if you're going to marry me." So my dad started reading the Bible and became a Christian. And at that point, um, he went in the military. He went into World War II and worked in the John Hopkins X-ray units in the Philippines and New Guinea and New Zealand and Australia. And there he contracted schistosomiasis japonicum, which is a tropical liver fluke that comes up through the combat boots and goes in the liver. And he got very, very sick. But the guy the colonel wouldn't let him out he did everything he could do to get out. My sister actually could tell you the story a lot better than me, but he did everything he could do to get out. He even tried to fly a plane, and so he'd get court-martialed and shit like that so he could get out. Well, they wouldn't let him out. So he finally tricked them by writing his name in with a list of other people, and they signed his papers so he could get back, because if he knew he didn't get back and get adjusted, he wasn't going to make it. And that was the truth, because he stayed in contact with the 60 men that were 60 GIs that were discharged with him. And unfortunately, back then when you wrote letters, you actually wrote letters. And unfortunately, I had copies of all of the letters until recently. They were destroyed by mistake. And all of the men were dead within 3 years. But my dad practiced for 60 years. So they would write back and forth, and eventually you'd find the letter. He had them all categorized. You'd find a letter from the spouse that said, "Bill, we're sorry to inform you, but Harvey or Joe or Michael or whoever had passed away." And my dad continued to practice. So as the years went by, they had children. My mother had her first child at age 36. That was my brother. And then she had my two sisters, Heather and Holly. And then 7 years later, at age 47, she had me. So at age 47, she practiced through each one of the pregnancies, right up until the day of delivery. And then during my pregnancy, she took a bad fall down the stairs. A bad fall, and it was so bad that my dad took an x-ray of her. And recently, it's interesting because at New York Chiropractic College, one of the guys that I had helped to get through school, had trained before he went into chiropractic college, found the x-ray that had been given when my dad passed to the college, the x-ray of me in the womb, because he x-rayed me because her situation was so bad. So I guess my life started in chiropractic when I was in the womb, and all the NET, neuro-emotional technique practitioners that have worked on me over the years, many of them from Life West, which is, I think, where you went to school, Ben? Mm-hmm. Many of them had told me that my first experience with chiropractic when I was in the womb. So that's when my first experience happened. My next experience happened, I guess, growing up, when I got scrapes and cuts and bruises. And if you look on my arm, if I can show it on here, you'll see a little mark here. Oh, anyway, I'm not sure how to get it on the screen. You see this mark right through here. You can't even see it. It's so that'll tell you. When I was 5 years old, I was 5 or 6 years old. I was at the school down the street, and I was climbing the fence to see my brother, who was 11 years older than me, play baseball. And they had those barbed wire things at the top of the schoolyard fence, and I ripped my arm open from my wrist to my elbow, where most kids would have been, rushed to the hospital. My dad picks me up, runs me home. The only thing he had in his pocket were used paper towels, handy fold paper towels in his pockets. He threw them in, picked me up, ran me home, put some ointment in my arm, which was called Brabon, which came from Telford, Pennsylvania. H.C. Weber was his name. And he put that in my arm, and then adjusted my atlas, and then wrapped it and gauged it. In a few days, I figured out a way to sell pictures to my wound, and the blood had been spitting out, but I never had a stitch, have full use of my fingers and hands. Thank God, being a chiropractor, right? So that was my next experience with chiropractic, I guess. And then from that point on, when I was about 13, I believe, Melvin Belli. Do you know who Melvin Belli is? See, and you're from the Bay Area, right? Okay, Melvin Belli was called the King of Torts. Did you ever hear of F. Lee Bailey? F. Lee Bailey was probably the biggest criminal or defense attorney in Boston. And in San Francisco, there was Melvin Belli. And Melvin Belli wrote a book called The King of Torts, because he was a tort. and he only practiced in the courtroom in cowboy boots, which screwed up his back, screwed up his neck, and gave him migraine headaches, terrible migraine headaches. Who he went through 5 wives with these migraine headaches. They all left him. They all liked him, but he was intolerable when he had these. So he was a master defense attorney. In fact, uh, in O.J. Simpson's case, 2 of the attorneys, there was Johnny Cochran, which people remember him because he's still alive. Then there was Melvin Belli, and then there was F. Lee Bailey. So there was a doctor by the name of Ted Frygard who in the early 70s wrote a book, which is still used today. It's called Whiplash Injury 847.0. And the doctors at Parker Chiropractic seminars said to Ted, "Man, this is a great book." He said, "Who would you like to have write the who would you like to have write the forward to your book?" And he said, "Well, I can't. He would never do that." And they said, "Well, how do you know?" And they said, "Well, I'd like to have this guy. His name's Melvin Belli." And there were Melvin Belli was the best, biggest, most well-known, most marketed personal injury attorney in the Bay Area in San Francisco. He drove around in white Corniche convertibles. He was a little bit like Harvey Specter on what's that show? Suits, right, on Netflix. So everyone knew Melvin Belli. So Jim Parker, who was an incredible man, I'm talking about the Jim Parker. "Hello, my name is James W. Parker, and I'm a chiropractor. What is your name?" "My name is," say it proudly, "I'm a chiropractor." So my father couldn't stand Jim Parker. My father thought he was a sham and a shyster and everything else. And, it's much like chiropractic. You were asking Lori Meinholz yesterday about, what is the situation with the respect for chiropractic? Well, back in the 50s and 60s, nobody particularly respected Jim Parker. They thought he was, as today, many people think that management consultants and mentors and coaches are, all in it for the money and all that crap. Well, it's not true. But the truth is, he was bold enough to ask for. He was smart enough to get Melvin Belli to come to Parker and speak. And my father said, "Well, heck, if Jim Parker can get Melvin Belli to come there and speak, I guess I can send Ruth," that was my mom, "and Timmy to go to the seminar and see what it's all about." So I went to the seminar with my mother. We drove because my mother wouldn't fly. So my father bought her a new Schaub convertible, green Schaub bathtub convertible in the early 70s, and sent us on our way to Parker. So I went to Parker, and there I was fascinated by, I was like 13 or something, and there was probably some 16 or 17-year-old girl who was gorgeous and from Marin County. And I said, "Well, I want to impress this girl." So I jumped into the pool and hurt my head and hurt my neck. And I wasn't a good swimmer, nor was I a good diver. And she didn't care whether I was dead or alive. So I never saw her again. But in the meantime, Melvin Belli came out to the pool, and Melvin Belli laid in the sun. And the pool was on the top floor of the Hilton Hotel in downtown Dallas. And it's where all the parties went on at Parker later on in my life. But I hardly knew that at 13. But anyway, he was turning beet red. And so I was bold enough to go over to him and say to him, "Mr. Belli, I think you better wake up because you're getting a really bad sunburn." And so he woke up and he said, "Oh my God, son." He said, "Thank you so much." He said, "I have to speak tomorrow morning." I said, "Yeah, I've seen your picture, so I knew who you were. And I didn't think you wanted to go on stage looking like a lobster." So he says, "Oh, thank you, thank you, thank you." And he says, "Can you meet me down at the bar and I'll buy you a Coke?" Today, he probably would have been arrested for, child trafficking or something, but he would have beat that anyway because he beat everything. He did cases for Zsa Zsa Gabor and Ava Gabor and you name it, anybody in Hollywood that had any type of personal injury thing, because back then it wasn't a pride thing if you went to jail. Today, if you go to jail in Hollywood, you become somebody, but he would get everybody off and handled all the worst personal injury claims. So how he got there was after Ted wrote this book. The doctors at Parker back in those days, they were called BBs. They were brown beggars, and Dr. Jim gave everybody a leather legal briefcase and engraved their name on it, like Dr. Ruth Schaub, Dr. William Schaub. But the CAs, of course, were all females back then. There weren't very many male CAs, but the females got a pink patent leather briefcase. It was rectangular, about I don't know, maybe 12 inches by 11 inches or something like that. Hot pink patent leather. Looked like a makeup kit, So the doctors walked around with their brown leather briefcases, and the CAs got little pink briefcases, and I proudly carried my little pink briefcase across the Parker floor because I went through the CA program at that time. And I came home, and I called my father while I was there, and my father had a good practice. He had a good practice, but I learned so much in the CA program that I said, I called my dad, and back then you had to call collect. This is probably 1970, 70, I would imagine. But anyway, I called my dad. My dad hung up on me because I told him what he had to do, and he didn't like his 13-year-old son telling him what he had to do. So he, boom, hung up the phone on me. I called back, and he, boom, hung up the phone on me, and I called back. So finally he listened to me. When we came back from Parker, he walked outside, and he said, Timmy, he walked outside of his office. My mom and I pulled into the office in the green Saab station wagon. He came out the front door. It was Friday. I think it was a Friday afternoon, and Friday was his big day in the office. And he walks out, and he doesn't say hello to my mother. He doesn't greet my mother. He doesn't give my mother a kiss. He walks around to the car, and he opens up my door. And I said, Dad, what's up? And he goes, get out of the car. Got out of the car because when my father told you what to do, you did it. And I got out of the car, and he said, I want to shake your hand. And I said, why? He said, Timmy, because I made $1,000 more this week than I've ever made a month in my life in chiropractic. And at that point, he had practiced for 35 years. Now, you have to understand, back in that day, to make $1,000 a month more, I think back in that day, he charged about maybe $6, $7 a visit. So if you put that in today's terms, you couldn't imagine how much I was able to help my father and my family with the things that I learned at Parker in 1970 or something. You follow? So then soon after that, I started working for him in the office and hired his CAs and fired his CAs. I was a teenager. So I learned what chiropractic was about even more so. I saw things happen that were miracles on a daily basis, not weekly basis, not monthly basis, but a daily basis. I saw miracles. So I went to my father, and I had always been interested in architecture. I had always been interested in design. I had always been interested in internal, design. What's the word I'm looking for?
Interior design.
Interior decorating. So I said, Dad, I'd like to do, either be a design architect, an interior designer, or a hospital administrator. Where I came up with that one, I have no idea why I wanted to work in a hospital, because that would be the last place I would ever want to work in my life today. But in those days, I thought maybe I could change medicine by working from the inside. So he said, why don't you become a chiropractor, then you can do them all. And I thought about that. I said, well, you're probably right about that, Dad, like he was right about most things. So I became a chiropractor. And in that process, my dad started taking me to National, because National when National College of Chiropractic had their homecomings in the 70s, it was the only chiropractic college of all the chiropractic colleges. Then at that time, there were 13 of them, then the Canadian Memorial. And it was the only chiropractic college I could go to get licensed back in New York State. And I wanted to practice either with my father or I wanted to practice with my mother or both. They didn't practice together all the time. They'd go about 10 years on, 10 years off together. And then he'd separate and she'd separate. And then they'd come back together and practice together again. Or with Julius Dintenfass, who practiced at 240 Central Park South in New York City. And Julius was asked by Governor Nelson A. Rockefeller to write the original board in chiropractic. And Julius was so freaking brilliant that he wrote a board that probably most orthopedists and neurologists couldn't have passed. But for some reason, after 25 years in practice without a license, that my mom actually started the practice in 1941 in Cortland, New York. And when my dad was in the military, he could get back and get adjusted and have his symptoms from schistosomiasis japonicum resolve. He, because of chiropractic care, which of course there was a miracle in our life because everybody else was dead in 3 years and he was still practicing. I decided that I would have to go to National because New York Chiropractic College, which is now Northeastern University, New York Chiropractic College wasn't licensed.
All right, not to interrupt you, but I just want to kind of shift the narrative right now. No
Sure.
disrespect at all, but I just want to make this a little more relevant to students today. You touched on a lot of things that people are not familiar with at all. You mentioned neuro-emotional technique, NET. If you could even just mention what that is in a nutshell, or you talked about being in your parents' office as a CA and the value of seeing miracles every day. What maybe that's a recommendation you're giving to people today that are looking for ways to gain experience before chiropractic school. You're talking about how different things were in the profession 30, 40 years ago. If you could maybe talk about today what you're observing or witnessing, or if you were giving recommendations to your kids or to somebody that is about to enter this profession, what recommendations would you give to them? And I'm just trying to really tailor this conversation to be as valuable as possible to the listeners, to the people that are watching you. You have so much wisdom. You've been in this profession now for over 100 years, if we count in the womb, and all of the wisdom that your parents passed down to you. So it's like now is the opportunity to kind of pass this wisdom on to the next generation. I just want to kind of refocus that as being what we're doing here right now.
I would be happy to do that.
Thank you.
So, and you had asked me before, you asked me about Chirosushi, and that's why we started, my son and I started Chirosushi together back in, I think it was 6 years ago. Well, actually, we started working on it about 7 years ago. And then about 5 years ago was our first event, which was in Las Vegas. So I had found that the tremendous training that I had through Parker seminars. I went to Parker seminars for 7 years of my life nonstop, 6 times a year. And during my start of practice, I attended 22 postgraduate seminars a year for 7 years of my life. And during that time period, I studied many, many, many different chiropractic techniques. One of them, I went to the first program with Scott Walker, which was NET. I mentioned to you earlier, I went to study NUCA at Life West in Oakland when they were having the bad fires there and they had just moved the school. So the thing of it is, I actually wrote a book called It's Not Too Late. I don't think you can really see it on here. There you go.
See it? Yeah.
It's Not Too Late. And in there, I talk about different chiropractic techniques. So if we want to talk about pre-chiropractic students, pre-chiropractic students, and there are probably 30 practitioners practicing today in the profession that were either going to become physical therapists or occupational therapists or had no clue about chiropractic. But I'm very proud to tell you that I could name on my fingers 30 chiropractors who have become chiropractors because I've inspired them to do that. And one of the way that I've inspired them is to share with them the history of chiropractic. Because unfortunately today, you know as well as I do, in the schools, most of them don't even know what a green book is, and they don't know the difference between BJ or DD Palmer.
Mm-hmm.
So if you don't understand the history of where the profession has been, which most of the chiropractors don't have a clue what it was like to practice, like I saw my parents practice for 25 years without a license. I saw them, not be able to indicate on their business card or on their letterhead that they were a doctor. All they could say was W. Schaub, DC, RN Schaub, or they couldn't even put DC, RN Schaub, chiropractor, or W. Schaub, chiropractor. But they couldn't put doctor, they couldn't put DC, they couldn't put doctor of chiropractic. They couldn't call themselves a chiropractic physician or all this stuff, which doesn't really matter, because chiropractic is about getting sick people well and getting results. So when we talk about the results in chiropractic, one of the first places you can start, most people weren't as bold as my mother to just go to a chiropractic college and never having been adjusted, but at least she'd seen the effects of chiropractic. So I had, over the course of the years, the reason why I have 30 chiropractors in the profession right now practicing throughout this country and other countries as well, is because they came and they shadowed me in my office. Many of them came and shadowed me in my office. Many of them became chiropractic students because of the experiences that they had with me in high school, when I would engage in teaching real health in the health class while they were teaching people about, I don't know, how to put a condom on a banana or something, which most of the kids know long before they're in high school today. So when I went to Syracuse University my first year, and I went to my advisor, and he said, well, what courses do you want to take? What do you want to do? And I said, well, I'm in a pre-med program. And he said, well, why are you in a pre-med program? I said, because I'm going to become a chiropractor. He said to me, chiropractor, what's that? And so I told him what you had to take. The basic prerequisites have not changed since Dr. Joe Jancy started the CCE. And you have to take, your prerequisites, which are, 6 hours English of 6
Just
hours.
so you know, they changed it about 3-4 years ago. So now you can have a bachelor's degree in art history. You don't have to have any science prerequisites. You could just have a bachelor's degree and you can go right in, which is a big deal. Obviously, you can kind of keep going. I just wanted to interject there.
Yeah, well, you can get into medical school and dental school too without a college degree. You don't have to have a degree. Most people think you do have to, but you don't. You just have to take certain prerequisite courses, and you don't have to have a bachelor's degree or a science degree or anything. Like my folks did. My father was a naturopath before he became a chiropractor. My mother had a degree in economics and business, and a BS degree in science and pre-med. So, but what I'm saying is, take the courses that you need to take in order to get into chiropractic college, but do not expect chiropractic college to teach you everything that there is to know. And we found that out as the years went by, and I had in my office, because I had such a big office, over the course of the years, I had 17 associates. And I found out that when they came out of chiropractic school, they didn't really know what chiropractic was. And so I started coaching people in the early 1980s, who later became, later became faculty members at New York Chiropractic College and asked me to teach at New York Chiropractic College. And they asked me to teach practice building. But the colleges had taught so much negative stuff at all the schools during the early 90s, when I don't think you were in practice yet then, Ben, am I correct?
No, I've
You
only been
were,
in practice 10 years.
yeah. And the thing of it is as you're in practice, you realize what you don't know. And it's as important to realize what you don't know as what you do know. So they come out of school and they think they know what chiropractic is, but when I taught up at the school, I found out that they didn't. So I would ask them questions like, "What is chiropractic?" And there's a question that Lori brought up the other day, is a question that Steve Tullius brought up the other day. And the thing of it is what is chiropractic means that really is, as a doctor, what is chiropractic to you? And to me, chiropractic goes way beyond the basic sciences and diagnosis and way beyond the technique that you use. Chiropractic is a healing art. It's a form of healing. It's a form of healing. It's not just diagnosing people and telling them what's wrong with them and then treating neck pain and back pain. But it helps people heal beyond their most unreasonable, unfathomable belief, because chiropractic gets people well and it keeps people well. So as we went on, I had all these students that graduated from all different schools. I'd sent them to Parker College. I'd sent them to Palmer College. When I was at National College, I sent three of my classmates to Palmer, to go to Palmer if they wanted to learn what chiropractic was about. Because if you didn't know what chiropractic was about when you went into National during those years, you would become a wonderful medical doctor, but you wouldn't become a great chiropractor, except for a few. And that include people like Jim Sigafus and Joe Borio and people like that. So I sent them to Palmer. So the different schools go through different eras too. But my son and I saw this. We saw this with my son Tristan, and I saw this, that the younger chiropractors that were graduating didn't know whether they should set up on their own, didn't know whether they should associate, and didn't really have a strong faith, confidence, and belief in their product, their service, or their idea, because colleges don't really teach that. So most of the colleges don't really teach that. I don't mean to, dish all the colleges. I'm not doing that. I'm just saying that the strength that they learn about what we do as a chiropractor is not necessarily there in the schools. So therefore, I wanted to create an organization or a tent that people could come under, and that was Chirosushi. So that's how we started Chirosushi, which is what you asked me about. So Chirosushi has now been sort of incorporated into BDC, Black Diamond Club, which is a company that's run by Sean Dill and Lacey Book, and I think you're probably in it. Are you, Ben? Are you in BDC?
I'm not actively participating, but I'm well aware, and
Of
yeah.
BDC. So we had events in Las Vegas for 3 years in a row, and then we had an event at Miami University. We had big name speakers come and speak, like Grant Cardone and Roger Stone and uh, 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 Brian Tracy. It was Brian Tracy's last public speaking event, to help not only our first year, we invited chiropractic students from every school to come to the seminar for free. And you know what happens when you give something away for free? It's not necessarily appreciated. But however, some of those students that came that year are some of the people that you know today in chiropractic. So I think we were very successful in helping the profession further its growth. And then BDC became, sort of the incorporated Chirosushi into their program and the Chirosushi concept.
Hmm.
So does that answer your question?
Yeah, for sure. I'm just if we could get more into like what students can do to start to practice the skills that are relevant to being a chiropractor in the real world. If you could touch on some of the skill sets, the way that I'm contextualizing it is I've broken Nate up into your inner state. So you're developing your inner scientist, your inner thinker, your inner artist, your inner teacher, your inner entrepreneur, just as a way to kind of orient people to the philosophy, art, science, business, communication piece. If you could kind of just touch on maybe what your practice was like, what you did with people, how you set it up, what was it like, and the skills that you need to develop, or you took all these seminars. What were the things that you gravitated towards and actually started to use yourself?
Well, first of all, by taking continuing education courses, by taking your courses in school, before you go to chiropractic college, there's three stages. Before you go to chiropractic college, it's a wonderful thing if you can become a chiropractic patient. Number one. Uh, the second thing is if you shadow a chiropractor or different chiropractors so you can see how they practice and what they do, if the chiropractor is willing to let you go into their office. And many students who are not even, I've had high school students, I've had college students, I've had chiropractic college students, I've had undergraduate students, I've had PhD students, I've had all sorts of students come in and shadow me in the office. And that's why many of them became chiropractors. So that's a great thing to do. Another great thing to do is to, if you have the opportunity to get employment with a chiropractor as a front desk CA, as a chiropractic assistant, as a assistant, a therapy assistant, as a, whatever you can do to hang out and help a chiropractor in his life or her life. That's a wonderful thing to do. When you get into school, don't think that the schools, and recognize the fact that the school's not going to teach you everything there is to know about becoming a chiropractor. So you will learn from the wisdom of people who have been in practice for a decade or 2 decades or 3 decades or 4 decades or 5 decades. Like, I remember when my mother and father hit their 50th year in practice, my mother said to my dad, "Hey, can we say we're doing it now instead of just practicing?" And he looked at her and he said, "Hell no, Ruth." He said, "About every 7 years, I think I know what I'm doing." And chiropractic is such an amazing life, becoming a chiropractor, that you will learn that you will never learn it all. And so you want to focus on one technique or two techniques when you're in chiropractic college. For me, I focused on applied kinesiology because I understood that I had the opportunity to be adjusted by George Goodhart, and I had the opportunity to watch George Goodhart in action when I was probably about 15 years old or something. But every technique has its benefits. In my book that I wrote that I showed you before, I wrote about neuro-emotional technique. I wrote about uh, Gonstead technique. I had practitioners who did a sweat, which is a particular type of upper cervical technique.
Can you
And
do me a favor and try and do your best to give an abbreviated insight into what is applied kinesiology and what is a neuro-emotional technique, and anything else you want to give an introductory message about? Because I've never had anybody on the podcast yet who sort of mentioned AK or NET, and it would be great if you could. I mean, you came in connection. The first book that I ever read that was a chiropractic related book was the Applied Kinesiology little mini book by Goodhart, 150 pages. I think it was written for patients, but it was really helpful for me to just have that as like a seed that was planted in me when I was just in the library looking for resources in college.
mhm. Well, George Goodhart also was a graduate of National College of Chiropractic. Um, though he was not honored there as a graduate, because applied kinesiology is both a diagnostic and a therapeutic chiropractic technique. When I say therapeutic, what I mean is applied kinesiology is exactly what it says it is. Ology means the study of, kinesi means muscles, and applied means how you apply that study of the strength of a muscle to a patient who comes to you. So up until 1960, almost all chiropractors, almost all MDs, almost all dentists, almost all physical therapists thought that if you had a spinal problem or you have had a neuromuscular problem, it was due to a muscle spasm. And George Goodhart in 1963 had a patient come to him who had a winged scapula, which means the scapula is sticking out for those, students that are, or prospective students that are watching. So he said, well, I'm not going to try to relax any muscles because that's what the osteopath that they'd seen before, the doctor of physical medicine that they'd seen before, whoever this young gentleman had seen before had done. So he started incorporating testing, isolating muscles, and then testing the relative strength of one muscle to another in the body. And he determined ways that could be used on the body like a computer to actually strengthen the muscles that were weak, and thereby the spine becomes stronger and the subluxation is reduced. So that's one technique. My thing is, people would say to me, well, when I was in the clinic, or when I started my practice, people would say to me, well, are you a applied kinesiologist? Or are you just a chiropractor? I would kindly remind them immediately that there is no such thing as just a chiropractor, but there is such a thing as just an applied kinesiologist. And that it's the same thing. Are you a Palmer grad? I don't really care what school people went to. I don't really care whether they were a Palmer grad, whether they're applied kinesiologists, whether they practice NET or network chiropractic. I care that they get chiropractic care. And throughout the course of their lifetime, sometimes people need to change the type of technique and the type of care they're getting, because chiropractic is not an event-based thing. It's not like you have an ear infection and you go into a medical doctor's office because you have an ear infection and they give you an antibiotic, give the mother an antibiotic to give the kid. I could tell you stories about why Tristan is so involved with Chirosushi.
Well, if it's not an event-based thing, what is it?
It's a lifetime thing. Chiropractic is something that you need to do from birth to burial, from as soon as you can start chiropractic care until you end your life, because our bodies change. We have multiple events that affect us. We have emotional events. And that's one of the reasons why Dr. Scott Walker started, maybe 25, 30 years ago, started NET technique, which is designed to clear out the emotional problems in the body that are causing vertebral subluxations to occur. All of these things are very, very helpful. All techniques are helpful.
How did you study AK? How did you study NET? Like, what are you actually studying?
Well, every type of chiropractic technique has a procedure. So you're studying the procedure of evaluation. For me, because of my background at National, I would have been a heck of an orthopedist, or I would have been a heck of a neurosurgeon, or a heck of a neurologist. But so what I did was I learned, when I came back to practice in New York State, they paid less for a workers' compensation visit or an automobile accident visit through the insurance company than what I charged patients for private care on a cash basis or a private insurance basis. So I realized, in order to complete a whole slew of forms, I had to figure out a way to do an examination quickly. So I learned how to do 202 orthopedic and neurological tests and test 110 structural spinal support muscles within a period of 10 minutes. Because that way nobody could say to me, well, what's wrong with this patient? Because no other doctor that was in my area, certainly in my area at that time or today, can evaluate a patient in 10 minutes with 202 orthopedic and neurological tests and test 110 muscles, but that's what I do. So Lori talked yesterday about, doing a complete, consultation and listening to the patient. And listening to the patient is wonderful, but you have to learn how to direct the conversation so that you cut through. Dawn, my partner, she's a PhD in energy medicine. She says you cut through people like you have a machete, and you cut through, what their problems are, whether they're chiropractic patients or they're chiropractic doctors. I cut through and figure out what their burning desire is. Kind of like Lucifer, what is your burning desire? Because people come to you, and if you just let them ramble and talk, you'll never cut through to what they want. Much like you're cutting through to me, saying, what does a new student need to do? And like I said, they need to go to a chiropractor. They need to get under chiropractic care. They need to begin to read and study what the different techniques are. And when they get to chiropractic college, they need to pick one technique. And I don't care what it is. I don't care whether it's AK. I don't think because I do AK, it's a better technique than any other technique. They need to.
Well, if I was to reframe the question, I would say, what is it that you can share uniquely, being who you are and the experience that you bring to this conversation, that can really give value that nobody else that I've ever had on this show has given value? Like what you just talked about, I think was right on the money of like what I'm looking for, which is where you said, what I know how to do is something that very few, if nobody else, knows how to do, which is do all these tests, really strike to the heart of what matters to a person, all in the matter of 10 minutes. Identify
No,
exactly.
they don't. No, they don't. You probably expect me to say yes, they do, but they don't. What it does is
I'm saying that's what you do that nobody else does. That's what I'm trying to tell you.
what I do when I'm done with an exam, I call it the wow exam. When I'm done with doing that exam, the patients come to me and say, and they could be patients that came to me because it was a insurance evaluation, independent medical exam, they call it. I call it an independent chiropractic exam. But when they come, and I'm done with them, they say, wow, you know more about me than my orthopedist does. Wow, you know more about me than what my chiropractor knows. Wow, you know more about me than what my neurologist has ever told me. And I'm like, yeah, that's true, because I did more tests and people like tests. So when you can do those tests, but if you do the tests just like this is how you end up doing tests, turn your head to the right, turn your head to the left. Okay. Okay. Bring your neck back. Okay. Now, if I can't bring my neck back, and I can't bring my neck back this way, and I can't turn my neck right, but the doctor says, okay, 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 okay. And then the next day they try to do a report of findings with them. It doesn't mean anything. But if you can communicate, when I taught at New York Chiropractic College for the semesters before my dad died, I had to take over. They had, at all the schools, you have your list, alcoholism, and it goes to whatever, herpes zoster or something. You have your list of questions to ask them. They're not effective. And the students know that. The clinician knows that at the school, but that's what they have to do for some reason, I guess. What I do with a patient is I sit down with them in consultation. I say, hey, what are you here for? And then what are your desires? What are your deepest desires? What do you want me to help you with? Do you just want a diagnosis, or do you want a treatment care plan, or do you want to get healthy, or do you just want your pain to go away? So first, you can't deal with a patient unless you know what it is that they want. And so I find out what they want, and then I tell them whether or not I can help them. And if I can't help them, I say to them things like, I don't think I can help you with this problem, but if I can't help you, after a few visits or something, then I will try to find a doctor that will help you, be it a chiropractor, orthopedist, be it whatever. I mean, I don't think chiropractic is the only way to go, but it is certainly, in my book, the best way to go with care, with any condition that anyone has. I don't care whether it's cancer or heart disease or, it needs to be incorporated into their life, because chiropractic care is a lifetime thing. It's not an event-based thing.
Hmm. And then just as we wrap up here, what's important to you in life right now? Where are you at in life? What matters? Where is your focus at? Are you yeah, where are you living? What are you up to?
Where do I live?
Or not where you living, but just, like, are you living in the same place that you've practiced forever? Did you move? Why'd you move? What's
Oh,
going on?
I've had all had practices that were in the home. I've had practices that were in the home. I had a 10,000 square foot office building where I had 3 doctors and myself practicing out of. I had 17 employees. I've had satellite offices that other doctors took on by themselves. I've trained at so many doctors. I, I don't know. I mean, most recently, I'm not. I just moved to Mexico. I don't know whether you knew that or not. I just moved to Puerto Morelos, Mexico, where I'm not practicing per se. I left the office that I practiced in for the last 10 years after I got sick. And, but prior to that, I had multiple offices, 3 offices, 5 doctors, 17 employees. So, how you choose to set up your life. What I like today is I like the individual one-on-one concierge type service with patients. And I can do that because of my communication skills, communicate with them what they want, what they need, fill their needs, and take care of them individually. That's what I do today. I wouldn't necessarily recommend that to a first time doctor. It depends on what that doctor wants. Like you said, where do I live? Well, you know, I live in chiropractic. That's where I live. I just love chiropractic. So.
Right on, brother. I appreciate you taking some time. And, at the end of the day, it's just exposing people to different flavors of, you know,
Yeah,
chiropractors in the world,
there's 110 chiropractic techniques that they can pick from. But ultimately, most people's technique at the end becomes the Schaub technique or the glass technique or the Smith technique, because if you study these different techniques, you begin to see the commonality between all of them. And too many people think I have the right technique, and I don't. You have to have faith, confidence, belief in your